Welcome to the Babylonian podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and in this season of the Babylonian, we're exploring what's called the New Testament Apocrypha. And you can join us too. Find the same summaries and notes that have been guiding all our discussions here in the Babylonian on our website, thebabylonian.com, or by using the link in the show notes below. All right, let's look at those New Testament Apocrypha. With scholars, sages, and the scriptures, let's Bible on. Okay, we're in the studio. We're here to talk about some New Testament Apocrypha. Continue going through the infancy Gospels. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. Audience and Peter, as you'll remember, we just went through the infancy Gospel of Thomas, and then before that, the Proto-Evangelium of James. If you haven't listened to those, you really should listen to those, especially before these next two infancy Gospels that we're going to go through. And in case you're wondering what an infancy gospel is, we also go over that in the Proto-Evangelium of James episode. But in this episode and the next few episodes, we're going to continue to go through other infancy gospels that are inspired and built on the Proto-Evangelium of James and the infancy gospel of Thomas. And since we've already talked about those, we're just going to be talking about the differences here in this episode and in the rest of the infancy gospel episodes. So you really have to lay a foundation by going over and learning about those first. It would be repetitive for us to just go over all the same things that happen already in the Proto-Evangelium and infancy gospel of Thomas. So yeah, this episode particularly, we are going to be going through the gospel of Pseudo Matthew. Now, I had never heard the rest of these infancy gospels, I'd never heard of until I read them. But Peter, you mentioned dragons, that you thought there were dragons in the Proto-Evangelium of James. And while there weren't dragons in the Proto-Evangelium of James, still a great infancy gospel, there are dragons throughout the gospel of Pseudo Matthew.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Who's Pseudo Matthew?
Pseudo Matthew. Yes. So pseudo just means fake, or it's not the real person. So Pseudo Matthew is, you can't call it the Gospel of Matthew because we already have a significantly more popular canonical Gospel of Matthew. So this is just the title we give to this apocryphon. I'm assuming it, because it's called Pseudo Matthew, that it's attributed to Matthew, the one of Jesus's disciples that ends up authoring the canonical gospel.
So their name wasn't actually Pseudo. It's just they claimed their name was Matthew, and we're like, well, we're going to give you a first name and we'll let you Matthew be your last name. The first name being Pseudo.
Unfortunately, yeah. Unless maybe Pseudo was their last name, and then they
switch it around.
Do one of those things where it's Pseudo, Matthew. Yeah,
Matthew, son of Pseudo.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have punctuation in the Greek, unfortunately, so we can't know whether it was Pseudo Matthew or Pseudo Matthew. It's a pretty good point.
Interesting.
Even though I think this is the name that we give it, and not their original Greek name. But either way, yes. Yeah, so this is supposed to be attributed to that Matthew, and it has dragons in it all over it. And this is really in the Synoptic Gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, Luke. Those are the first three of the canonical Gospels in the New Testament. We see that Jesus goes into the desert after he is tempted, or to be tempted after his baptism. And in Mark's, I actually really like Mark's explanation. It's like in Matthew and Luke both, we have this whole dialogue between the Satan and Jesus. But in Mark, it just says he went out into the desert and he was with wild beasts. And I think it says something about angels ministering to him as well. So it's this real epic image of new creation. Isaiah says the wolf is with the lamb, and the baby is with the cobra, and they're chilling together. And we're going to see a lot of that in Pseudo Matthew. Pseudo Matthew is, how do you put it? If you're a pet person, this is your infancy gospel. If you're into dangerous, crazy snakes and serpents, this is your apocryphal gospel. It's got all that.
If you tested Slytherin on your house test for Harry Potter, this is yours. So when you said he went into the wilderness and it resembled Isaiah's visions of like a baby and a snake being together, or an ox. I don't know if it's an ox or a lamb or whatever, being next to a lion. Like, it's similar because Jesus was like comfortably right next to these animals, and he wasn't threatened by something that should be threatening to him. And that's the illusion. And that's from the Bible that we see that in Jesus' experience in the wilderness in Mark. But now you're saying that there might be something that mimics that in an interesting way.
Yeah.
With some kind of fantastical creature.
Yes, exactly. Regular creatures, regular wild beasts that we know, like lions. There's lions in here too, and panthers. I think jaguars. There's some ferocious beasts in here, and then there's also dragons, multiple dragons. And we'll even see that in the next, I believe it's the next infancy gospel we're going to be talking about, the Arabic infancy gospel. But yes, we're going to see more of this image of, and I think this is what this author is trying to get at, but restored creation and these animals being at peace with Jesus, as Jesus is like this new Adam who's, working with the animals and such. So yeah, that was a great explanation. So thanks for explaining that. And that's just a crazy, like, I remember reading over that so many times in Mark where it's just like Jesus with the wild animals, until like I heard that explanation. I was like, oh yeah, with the wild animals, I guess he's just chilling with his like arm resting on top of a lion over here, and his other arm, like, I don't know, with like a rhinoceros. Obviously rhinoceroses aren't in Jerusalem. Anyways, yeah. So this is this gospel of Pseudo Matthew.
Can I hop in here real quick? Because I have a little bit to add on that theme of like animals. If you look in the stories, in the parts of like the prophets, they'll go ahead and they'll condemn the people of Israel for their sins and such. And I believe it's in Hosea 4, God talks about, I think in some sense, the issues of northern kingdom of Israel at that time led to some kind of like issue with the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, and the fish of the sea or whatever. And then after they leave in, I think it's 2 Kings, it's like 2 Kings 17 or 2 Kings 20, somewhere around there. They leave, and then the animals come. There's like lions who come in and they like attack people. And so like they had to, like, because the people of Israel had left. And so now it's like showing the total disorder and chaos that enters into that land. And so as a the Christian view is that there is a holistic restoration of the cosmos, right? It's not just reduced down to like just humans and plants, but also humans and animals. So I just want to point out how some aspects of that being in the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I think, doesn't Isaiah also talk about like these wild animals inhabiting Jerusalem whenever it's taken away, like ostriches and stuff? I think it's one of the prophets, maybe Jeremiah. But I know Jonah, whenever he preaches against Nineveh, they also make the cows fast with them, right? Yeah. So yeah, there's like this more communal nature where like animals, and Noah's Ark, right? Like the animals are saved with Noah's family because of the righteousness of Noah. So yeah, you have this communal view of humans and animals throughout Scripture. Not that animals are on the same page. It's not at all what we're saying, right? But I like you were saying, like the animals kind of can demonstrate other levels of, like in that instance, in the besieging and leaving desolate of Samaria. It was Samaria, right? Or was it Jerusalem? When 2 Kings is,
it's going to be northern kingdom of Israel, and Samaria is the capital. So maybe it specifies Samaria being the place. But I like your comment there. Like you clarified, hey, like we're not saying, animals are on the same level as humans, right? The Bible says that each of these animals was made in their own likeness, but humans were made in the likeness of God. So the Bible's view, the Old Testament's view, is that humans are exalted above the animals. They're not at the same level, but it also has like God has compassion on them. So like you mentioned in Jonah, right? Jonah calls out to the city of Nineveh and says, in 40 days, this whole place is going to be condemned and destroyed or whatever. And then he gets upset when they repent, including the cattle. The cattle repent too. And then like God asks, hey, you cared so much for this tree that dies, or this vine, but don't you care so much? Shouldn't I have compassion on the people of Nineveh and also their cattle? And then he ends with that.
Think about the cattle, man.
Yeah, think about them. So I guess people who love Yahweh should love animals.
Yeah, this is Man, we don't even need to talk. I mean, yeah, this is going to be great, but we've already gone over like a 10 minutes of just like your biblical theology of animals. So yeah, this is going to be great. So before we jump into the Gospel of Pseudo Matthew, a couple of little introductory details. So this dates to before the 5th century. Some of the the original name given to it wasn't Pseudo Gospel Matthew, but some original names were Liber de Infantia, which, if you can tell, is the Latin for the infancy gospel. I think some manuscripts say infancy gospel of Matthew and Jesus. Historia de Nativitate Mariae et de Infantia Slavatorius. I'm sorry for all the speakers for butchering that, but that's history of the nativity of Mary and the infancy of the Savior. Those are the two original titles. This is apparently an influential apocryphal gospel in the Middle Ages and influenced some medieval art. And it was one of the gospels that apparently made the proto-evangelium of James and infancy gospel of Thomas popular. Again, I'm going to continue to repeat this. Those are the two central infancy gospels. If you don't understand, like, those are like, if you read those two, you pretty much have an idea of the vast majority of the rest. The rest are like the stories told in the infancy gospel of Thomas and the proto-evangelium of James. Have you seen Into the Spider-Verse 2?
I have. I thought it was great.
So yeah, those are giving us all the canon moments of the non-canonical infancy gospels. So those moments are just going to be replayed in different ways. This is like a multiverse of different apocryphal explanations of the same stories with a couple additions, but the vast majority is just the same stories from proto-evangelium of James and infancy gospel of Thomas.
Can I clarify that analogy and then maybe make a guess at what that might look like? So in the Spider-Verse 2, they point out there's a lot of different Spider-Man, different versions of Spider-Man, but there's common themes that always happen. For example, one of them, an older figure, a quote-unquote Uncle Ben or an archetype of him, typically dies. And so it depends on which person, but, you know, depending on the Spider-Man, there will be an Uncle Ben or someone who's similar to them that will die. And, you know, he'll have to take up and get the, you know, superpowers. And then there's the person who falls in love with Spider-Man who also dies. And so, you know, that person, whether it's a Gwen Stacy or a Mary Jane, they got to die. It's a canon event. And so I guess what you're possibly saying is that some of the features of these, you know, proto-evangelium of James or from the Gospel of Thomas or infancy Gospel of Thomas, there's going to be patterns. So I'm guessing based off of what I know from our previous episodes that there's going to be images of Jesus being super, super powerful and maybe controlling his powers in a way that might mess other people up. There might be a lot of healing, and there might be some people who, there might be like some, I don't know. I'm trying to think of what would come out of the proto-evangelium of James. I remember like time stops all of a sudden whenever he's born, and that, and then there's issues of doubt. Maybe there's doubting that he's the savior. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great, but not even like, not so strictly that, but like not as broadly just like, oh, there's going to be these themes, but like just the straight up stories. Actually, probably a better explanation would be like the 3 Spider-Man reruns, where it's like, you know, Spider-Man's, you know, he's going to have his Uncle Ben die. You know, it's the same character, same thing happening, but there's this maybe different explanation. And Spider-Man is maybe a little bit more of like a somewhat cool nerd or a more like super nerdy nerd who's awkward and doesn't know anything, you know, but really it's going to still continue to have those stories. And these stories become almost canonical, non-canonical stories because, you know, it's not that people are recognizing them as canonical, but they're so popular and influential that if you want to write an infancy gospel that's going to be preserved, then you're going to be taking from these and then maybe putting a little bit of a spin. And then we'll also see that even though they incorporate stuff from the infancy gospel of Thomas, which, as we talked about, Jesus is like this like little menace, you know, they might try and like downplay like, oh, you know, Jesus might have like cursed a guy to die just for bumping into him, but, you know, and try and give a little bit of like a explanation for why that happened and make it a little bit lighter, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, overall, yeah, that's a great point. So for this, for example, for Pseudo Matthew, the first 17 chapters are based on the proto-evangelium of James. as well as 26 through 34, 37 through 39, and chapter 41 being based on the infancy gospel of Thomas. But Jesus is made, again, less evil and less childish. And then apparently this gospel of the birth of Mary and Pseudo Matthew are also strongly connected, but the edition of the New Testament Apocrypha that I'm reading doesn't even contain that, but it just mentions that. Apparently this is like, so we have these Latin names for it. This was not known in the East, apparently. But yeah, with that, those are all the background details. And now we're just going to jump into this. And really, like I said, a lot of these events, it's retelling a lot of the same stuff from Proto-Evangelium of James or Infancy Gospel of Thomas. So go back and listen to those first. Even if you don't listen to this one, those are the two central ones. And really what we're going to go over here are the differences in the details. And even then, there's still quite a bit. But you really have to understand those first. So let's jump into it. Okay, so the first 12 chapters are based on the Proto-Evangelium of James. And again, they might add in a little bit more details. Like in this story, Jehoiakim has been married. Jehoiakim, who's going to be the father of Mary. At this point, he has no children. But in this version, he's been married to Anna for 20 years without having any children. So Jehoiakim goes away for 5 months instead of the 40 days. And then an angel tells him that Anna has already conceived a child by seed. Now, do you remember the difference between this and the Proto-Evangelium of James in how, other than I mentioned the 5 months versus 40 days, but do you remember what would make this the more like a very consequential step up from the Proto-Evangelium of James's explanation?
Well, I think the purpose would be to prove the virginity of Saint Anne, or is it Anna?
Yeah, Anna.
Anna.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Anne is just another version of the name. But yeah, I have Anna here. Yeah. So yeah. Mm-hmm. So in the other one, the angel tells him that he's going to conceive after 40 days. He goes back and then they conceive. But here he's been gone for 5 months and the angel tells him that Anna has already conceived. So now we've gone from just following this archetype of Abraham and Sarah and all the Old Testament families that struggled with barrenness to Jehoiakim and Anna fulfilling that role. We go from that to Anna is just straight up a virgin when she gives birth to Mary.
She's becoming like Mary.
Yeah, exactly. The type and like how broad it is just becomes less and less broad for Anna. So anyways, she gives birth, and at 3 years old, Mary, it just directly says that Mary is acting like a 30-year-old. She's praying all the time, and she has a glorious and beautiful face to the point where people can barely even look at it. So this is just like straight up crazy. And I don't think I mentioned this in the Proto-Evangelium of James, but yeah, in the Proto-Evangelium of James, she legit has like angels even feeding her. So she's got all of that, and then like you can barely even look at this woman, which is like, okay, we get the point. She's out there. So Abiathar offers, so there's like this priest in charge of everything. She offers a lot of gifts to Mary for her to marry her son. But Mary refuses because she claims that she has vowed to stay a virgin perpetually because, as she explains, Abel was righteous on account of his sacrifice and virginity, and Elijah was taken up because he was spotless. So there's kind of a little bit of an interesting, like, okay, like Abel was a virgin. There's like this significance made out of like an unmentioned detail in the Bible, which is just, I don't know. It's very interesting that you could have chosen like a lot of characters. Well, I'm sure there are characters, I'm not thinking of any at the time, but right now, but there are characters who are not mentioned to be married, and you don't have to, I don't know. To me, obviously it's like it's making something out of nothing there, which is very, very interesting. And she's even like explicitly stating that she's going to stay a virgin. So if you couldn't tell, like it's trying to like turn up the volume on Mary's mother is a virgin and Mary is going to stay a virgin. So anyways, in the Proto-Evangelium of James, whenever she turns 12, the priests are worried that she's going to have her first period and pollute the temple, and so they have to move her out. And so she's still in the temple, like in the Proto-Evangelium of James, she's been in the temple since she was dedicated when she was real young. So in this one, she turns 14, and it's the Pharisees who are in charge, and they say, and this is just added in, that there have always been virgins who were brought up in Solomon's temple and then married when they turned 14. So now it kind of like legitimatizes Mary being dedicated as a child into the temple. And they say brought up in Solomon's temple, which means like if this has been happening since Solomon's time, that's as long as the temple has been around. So very interesting. I think there might be some connection between them trying to make the connection between Mary and the tabernacle or the temple, because Jesus will reside in her physically for 9 months as a fetus after she conceives by the Holy Spirit.
Wait a minute.
So yeah.
Wait a minute. Wasn't Solomon's temple destroyed before the second temple was built where Mary would be around at that time? Are they just saying like every time that there has been a temple, there has been in that like intermediate period where there was no temple because it got destroyed and then it was built that, that.
So, okay. So good question. So this is the chapter where it happens in chapter 8. And I'm just reading from it directly right now. It says, now it came to pass when Mary was 14 years old, and on this account there was an occasion for the Pharisees, saying that it was now accustomed that no woman of that age should abide in the temple of God. They fell upon the plan of sending a herald through all the tribes of Israel, that on the third day all should come together into the temple of the Lord. And all people had come together. Abiathar the high priest arose and mounted on a higher step, that he might be seen and heard by all the people. And when great silence had been attained, he said, and I think this is the part where he explains, hear me, O sons of Israel, and receive my words into your ears. Ever since this temple was built by Solomon, there have been in it virgins, the daughters of kings, and the daughters of prophets and of high priests and priests. Promises that it does make the claim that this is the same temple.
They got it wrong.
Yeah. I will say, if you read earlier texts, like this is going back to my last season on the Old Testament Apocrypha, I talk about how one Apocryphan called 1 Esdras is, and even 2 Maccabees, because while 2 Maccabees doesn't exactly say that they rebuilt the temple, just says that they restored the temple and they destroyed what was defiled. They probably, from my understanding, scholars think that they just made altogether like a new temple. And then Herod kind of basically made a new temple as well. Like the second temple was just plain shabby. So technically it's like the second, it's like the temple version 2.75. But either way, these texts really do their best to kind of like connect it as if it's the same. So like in 2 Maccabees at the beginning, it says like, oh, there was this whole origin where there was like this special fire that they only kept in Solomon's temple. And Jeremiah, right before the whole exile and destruction of the temple, took that fire, hid it in a cave along with the Ark of the Covenant, and all the different utensils from the temple. And then it kind of shows Judah Maccabee reinstating the temple. He doesn't have those things. Those things are hidden and they won't be found until later. And then also 1 Esdras, if I remember correctly, that also is really trying to show how the second temple is really on par with Solomon's temple, even though the canonical book of Ezra and 1 Esdras is kind of like a remix of Ezra Nehemiah. It just has like cut, paste, and then a couple of little small additions. In the canonical Ezra and Nehemiah, I think it's Ezra, right? Or no, yeah, I think it's Ezra, right? Whenever they actually complete it, and there are people who are like, you can't tell by the sound of the crowd because like half the people are cheering so loud they're happy, and then the other half are like weeping because it's nothing like what they saw Solomon build.
I think that's Haggai.
It
might also be in Ezra as well.
Okay.
But I think it's in Haggai. It definitely happens.
Okay. Yeah.
And Ezra too, probably. I think it's Ezra. But yeah, Ezra Nehemiah. We could say Ezra Nehemiah.
Yeah. Because that was one scroll in the canonical Tanakh. So that's the reason we're saying it's Ezra Nehemiah, not because we don't actually know. But yeah. So yeah, it's different from the canonical explanation that, this is really a disgrace and not compared to the Solomonic temple. But yeah, good point is that for 70 years, they didn't have a temple. It was 70 years between the destruction and building of the temple, right?
I don't know when the temple was destroyed. I know that Babylon takes Jerusalem in 586, and then the new temple's built in like 513. I want to say 513. Yeah, I would be around.
I think so.
That's pretty close to. That's about 70 years. So maybe we'll give or take some. So I want to say 513. Could be wrong.
That sounds about. I don't have the dates, But either way, there was time when there was no temple. This is not the same temple. They have some stuff. And also, I mean, I guess it would be pretty dope if there were like women serving in the temple the whole time. One, Solomon definitely was not known for having a particularly high view of women. And number two, there's just like no note of, any of that. But it's still trying to show Mary as like this fulfillment of an archetype or like a pattern that's not even found in the Old Testament, which I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting. Anyways, so that's their whole thing. And so Abiathar, they do the whole thing like they do in the Proto-Evangelium of James, where they bring all the rods of the unmarried men in the tribe of Judah into the Holy of Holies, and then they bring them back and give them to everyone. And they say, whoever has the shortest will take her. And Joseph's is chosen. However, Joseph doesn't want to take Mary because he says he is old. And get this, he says that Mary is younger than his oldest grandson. So Joseph not only has children, he legit has grandsons. And like Mary, so like this is just interesting because you can see how in the Proto-Evangelium of James, they're trying to make a point about, Joseph's got no reason to sleep with this woman and has no desire to. But now it's just like there's this really weird, it's like super large age gap. And so I guess like if James, James, the brother of Jesus, the half brother of Jesus, or in this simply the legal brother, is writing after Jesus, even like 20 years after Jesus's ascension. That's a pretty stinking old dude writing his letter, or Jude, or, so.
Get your nativity set right. If he does not have gray hair, white hair, or he's part of the bold brotherhood, get him switched out.
Yeah, seriously. This is it. It's modifications to the infancy, to the Proto-Evangelium of James. Gotta admit, I'm not as big of a fan. So anyways, they have these virgins who are supposed to take care of Mary, but they start mocking her and calling her the Queen of Virgins. So then some angel appears and then tells them that it is a true prophecy about her being a virgin. And so they're all ashamed. And then they ask Mary and pray for her forgiveness. Again, like you said, like you mentioned, there's this recurring theme of like, back up my woman. She's like the top virgin. So, yeah, this is like next level. This is the apocryphal origins, like the next level 2.0 of the Virgin Mary. Not only is she a perpetual virgin, her mother's a virgin, and
her husband does not want anything to do with her in that regard. He's like, she's maybe a great granddaughter, but
yeah, exactly.
Distance.
So, anyways, Mary conceives, and Joseph comes back from this trip to see her. He finds out she's pregnant, and he's making this scene. The virgins are like, no, she's pregnant. Trust us. Like, a freaking angel came and like, God against us because we were calling her that. And so Joseph, still laments it. It's not until the angel visits Joseph in a dream and says that she's a virgin that Joseph really believes. And then he starts giving thanks to God. So that's all based on the Proto-Evangelium of James. This, not as much so. Well, it's still based on it. But going off and adding a little bit more to the story. So in this is interesting because it doesn't notice this in the Proto-Evangelium of James. So here now, both Mary and Joseph have to enroll in Bethlehem for the census because it says explicitly that they both came from Bethlehem, from the family of David, and from the tribe of Judah.
So that's showing them both as being one descended from Judah. So that helps set up the kingship of Jesus. Is it also trying to, this might be a stretch, is it also trying to say that they were independent of each other? Like that they were seen as separate entities socially, so that they're not, but they're married.
I didn't think about that.
That part might be a stretch.
What I was thinking of was the two genealogies we get for Jesus, the one in Matthew and the one for Luke. Matthew chapter, the very first like 14 or so verses of Matthew, or maybe it's 16. I know it's 14 generations, and then, or maybe 17 verses. I don't know. I'm guessing that. But then Luke chapter 3, where it has the two genealogies, and Matthew's, or no, is it Luke's that says that his is specifically for Joseph? I can't remember.
I don't remember, but there's two genealogies.
Yeah, one of them says it's for Joseph, and then the other one doesn't say. So there's been all these proposals for, but there's a lot of names that are the same. And then like one of them will break off and have like a little bit of a different name. And then one of them will have like a couple insertions. And so there's just like this interesting, even today, there's like a debate of like, how do you understand this? And like, Are they just trying to tell different things? And we have early church fathers and historians who are saying like, oh, it's just talking about, one is talking about the more genealogical genealogy or physical genealogy, and one is talking more about the legal genealogy. So here, I think this is what I'm pretty sure this is trying to do, is say that one of the genealogies is Mary's and the other one is Joseph's. So I think that's a pretty clever way to like kind of like, you know, wink and nod at that, even if it's not true. I don't know. So anyways, so they go off to Bethlehem, and on their way, Mary claims to see one people weeping, and then she sees another people rejoicing. So Joseph rebukes her, calls her stupid, and then an angel appears and rebukes Joseph and says, the rejoicing people are the Gentiles who are brought near to the Lord, and the Jews are the ones weeping for leaving God. And then this angel says, hey, Joseph, by the way, it's time for her to give birth, and then tells them to go into a cave that no light of the sun had ever shone upon, which I guess is kind of like connected to that donkey that Jesus tells his disciples to get a donkey that nobody sat on for him riding into Jerusalem. But anyways, they enter it, and then a super bright light shines, and Jesus is born. He stands up, and then angels immediately start worshiping him. So, yeah, you look like you have something to say there.
Well, the only thing I was thinking is perhaps maybe they were trying to do something with a cave no light has shone upon, and Jesus is the light of the world. And then you get that. Maybe they're trying to say, oh, look, you know, the light is going to shine brighter. I don't know.
Yeah, the darkness can't grasp it, even if there's never been the light of the sun in that. Like, it's kind of like an extra level apologetic of Jesus. Why is there a light in this cave? It has nothing to do with the sun. The sun's light has never been on this cave. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So Jesus has a pretty dope birth here. And then you have it just says, gives kind of this side comment of like, these prophets in Jerusalem are all pointing to this star that's shining brighter than all the other stars. And that star is over the cave, like in the canonical gospels that leads the wise men over there. And then, so this is really interesting. So, and I had heard of this first, and I've actually told this to you before, because I heard this in a sermon from one of the pastors gave at my church. So Mary leaves the cave and goes to a stable to put Jesus in a manger, and there's an ox and ass that adore him to fulfill Isaiah 1:3 and Habakkuk 3:2, or Septuagint Habakkuk 3:2. Do you remember that?
I do. Well, I do remember seeing something like that in a YouTube video. I don't remember you explaining it to me, but I do know that that's something in the Old Testament. But I believe that at one point you might have mentioned it. But I know that's why they always put it in the nativity scenes. So they get that right. They just don't get Joseph's hair right.
Dude, facts. Let me see. Let me pull it up. Isaiah 1:3 says, the ox knows its master, and the donkey its owner's manger, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand. So the explanation is, and my pastor gave this explanation that he tied back to Origen. He said that this comes from Origen in 2nd century, right? Origen in 2nd century,
around there.
Yeah. So his explanation of this is that the ox is a clean animal, and the ass is a donkey. The donkey is an unclean animal, and so it represents the clean ox. The ritually clean ox represents Israel, and then the ritually unclean donkey represents the Gentiles. So it represents both the Gentiles and the Jews coming together to worship Jesus. And that's in contrast to the two people that Mary had seen when she was being taken to Bethlehem. She sees, the Jews weeping that they had left God, and the Gentiles rejoicing that they had been brought in. So you see like the whole like roundabout of like the Jews being restored and being brought into that. I guess that's kind of like an image of that whole, when Jesus comes again, like before Jesus comes again, just like before Jesus's first come, you see this whole image of the Jews leaving God and the Gentiles coming in. And in the same way, they're going to come back together at his second coming. I think that's really cool. It's pretty clever. His whole explanation of that isn't original, but it's still super cool. And if you didn't know, that's where we get why, if you buy any nativity at all, it always has an ox and a donkey. So you got that from an Apocrypha, an early church father, depending on whichever one actually made this more popular. But yeah, I think that's pretty dope.
So to your listeners, if you're not parents already, when you do become parents and you're teaching your kids the nativity story, this is a great time to explain how those who were far from God and those who were God's chosen people because they were biologically related to Abraham became one in Jesus, you can do that
Mm.
with the ox and the donkey with your nativity set, and you can help them get ready to get A's in their theology quiz in seminary. Or
Extra credit,
so they
even.
can actually be more loving to those who are different than them, like which
Mm.
fits into like the Ephesians theme of, diversity, which Paul explains, those two getting unified in Ephesians 2:11-22.
There you go. I just or even Ephesians. Well, the full Ephesians
Yeah, the
too,
whole
right?
book.
Like we and you. Yeah, the you here is the Gentiles, and then the we is the Jews. Yeah, I'm talking about becoming one. Yeah, great application. You can apply this Apocrypha today
to your life. Well, you can't do it today if you're listening to this before the nativity on the calendar. Is that what we call it? Or Advent? You can't do it before Advent. This is only applicable during that month.
Save it for next Christmas.
Save it for
Yeah. It's interesting fact. I think whenever I learned that, I was like, oh, that's such a dope. Like, nobody's seen the same thing whenever I see this nativity scene.
And while you're at it, paint Joseph's hair gray. Like, fix that up too.
Make it white, dude. This guy is like in the grave already. Yeah. So interesting. Yeah, really interesting. So anyways, they go to dedicate Jesus in the temple, and Simeon comes to prophesy about Jesus. Apparently, according to this source, Simeon is 112 years old. I think, didn't we talk about didn't the proto-evangelium explain how old he was? Let me see.
I don't remember.
Do you remember? Maybe it didn't. I remember that it explains that he's one of the priests that has Zechariah brought it back. Oh, it doesn't. But he's 100. And in case you ever wanted to know how old he was, according to this infancy gospel, he's 112. So anyways, then Mary and Joseph, they travel to Egypt, like in the canonical gospels. But this is, when Herod is trying to kill them. And they have 3 boys and a girl and baby Jesus. So I guess that's Jude, James. I'm trying to remember the name of the other brother that it mentions that Jesus has. I know it's also a J name, I'm pretty sure. And I know it mentions him having a sister, like your brothers and sister, or maybe it says sisters are here and mother. Anyways. But they're all traveling together to Egypt. So they come to a cave to rest in it. And then they find out that there were many dragons come in. Enter the dragons. So they come into the cave and they scare the boys until Jesus gets off his mother's lap, and the dragons start to praise Jesus. And this apparently fulfills Psalm 148:7. This is the psalm where it's saying, praise the Lord, all you these things. So it says, praise the Lord from the earth, you great sea creatures and all the ocean depths. And the sea creatures, I mean, these are more like, you could say that they're more like sea monsters, right? I think this is the Hebrew word tamim, right? Is it tamim or tanim? One of those, I think. But these are some like gnarly like sea beasts. Think of like Leviathan and such. So, and I guess maybe there was like a Greek translation that put this into like dragon or old Latin translation that they were relying upon. But yeah, this specific non-canonical example is the fulfillment of that psalm. So these dragons come together and they start praising Jesus. And then Jesus commands the dragons, oh, don't hurt anyone. But Mary and Joseph are still afraid. So Jesus tells them that he is not a child, but he has always been perfect. And all the animals of the earth, of the forest, are docile before him. So they go through the desert, and lions come and start leading the way, and panthers and wolves join in too. And then 2 oxen come and carry a wagon with their stuff. And then these animals start like submitting to Jesus and worshiping him and bowing their heads. And, Mary stays afraid, but Jesus tells her that, that they have actually come to serve her and him. So now they're serving Jesus, but Mary also kind of gets thrown in the mix there. So again, you're seeing that kind of exaltation of Mary there. And this apparently fulfills Isaiah 65. And Isaiah 65:25, by the way, it's not a lion and the lamb. It's the wolf and the lamb feed together, and the lion each draws like the bullock, and the dust shall be the serpent's meat. Bullock, KJV. Why am I? Anyways, a bullock, by the way, is an ox. Okay, so
they had bullocks at the time of the KJV being written. We don't have those today. We have oxen. The oxen is a descendant of the bullock.
It's the micro-evolved version of the bullock.
Yeah, microevolution.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, this, I didn't remember that it explicitly notes that this is that the fulfillment of that prophecy. So I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a cool thing, Jesus. That sounds like it. Honestly, that's such a great piece of art. Like if somebody drew like an image of, like Jesus riding in Mary's lap on a lion with like a tiger and a panther like carrying the rest of his siblings and half siblings, or sorry, in this only legal siblings, gray-haired Joseph and their wagon and stuff. Like, dude, I would hang that up on my whole living room wall. I don't know. I think that's a pretty dope image.
His siblings would be really old, right? So we should not be imagining other kids that are like 10 or 4 or something like that. Like these are full on grown men.
Yeah.
They're about to have their own kids. So,
yeah,
or have their own kids.
His grandsons would be ready to, because Joseph's youngest grandson was older than Mary. So he's younger than his legal father's great grandsons. So you got some interesting things going on here.
Yeah. Maybe what we should be visualizing is more like an extended family reunion going with the animals too. But we're not saying those are family, but
Well, actually, I was just about to say that. Not only do you have, this whole, you first see this thing about the animals representing the Jews and the Gentiles coming together. Then you see all the generations together, assuming, all of Joseph's descendants are with him. Then you see all the animals coming together. Like,
Could that be foreshadowing a future time where there's a king who rules over lots of generations and different creatures?
Perhaps. It's an image of heaven on earth. This is it, right here.
Maybe.
So, anyways, let's see. So, anyways, they travel into Egypt. They find a place to stay, and they enter into this temple that has 365 idols. Just so that, in case you're positioned in any direction on the compass, at any degree +5, there's an idol for you to be bowing down to. But then, as they enter, all the idols fall prostrate on the ground and shatter and break into pieces to fulfill Isaiah 19:1. Isaiah 19 verse 1 begins a prophecy against Egypt. See, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and is coming to Egypt. The idols of Egypt tremble before him, and the hearts of the Egyptians melt with fear. And that,
I'm thinking of another story where there's idols that bow down to, it's not specifically Jesus, but it's to the Ark of the Covenant, right? In 1 Samuel, there's a part where the people of Israel go into battle with the Philistines and they lose. The Philistines have the Ark of the Covenant, and then they put this idol or god that the Philistines worship in the same room. And Dagon, or Dagon or something like that, he falls down and, bows down before the Ark of the Covenant. But, I guess that's less specifically Jesus, but if we believe Jesus has the presence of God, Jesus is God himself, it would make sense. And the ark represents the presence of God. That'd be pretty similar.
Yeah, I'm totally I connected this with that story. That's the same thing. I brought that. That was the first story that came to mind for me too. But now I'm realizing that what they just cited from Isaiah, I think, is pulling on that story. I'm pretty sure. It wasn't until you mentioned that I was like, I was thinking of both at the same time, and then I was like, okay, so yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, so and then in the story, the governor hears about what happens. He goes with his army to worship Jesus with his army and his friends, and he says he must do to their gods, and he says he must do what their gods do, lying in prostration. In the same way their idols are lying in prostration to Jesus, he too has to do it. He confesses Jesus is Lord, and then says if he doesn't say that, he will anger God, as Pharaoh and the Egyptians who didn't believe in God did and were drowned in the sea with all their army. And then everyone in the city believes in Jesus. So that's a kind of cool story. It's interesting that they held on to that history of, Pharaoh and army being drowned. I guess in Jesus's time, there were Jews. There was a pretty big Jewish population in Alexandria. I don't know about the rest of Egypt, but, they were more spread out. So I guess perhaps they could have known a little bit more about that, and just with Greek influence being everywhere. But yeah, So anyways, we're then brought to a story where Jesus is a 4-year-old. He's playing by the Jordan River and he makes 7 pools. Okay, so now we're back to infancy gospel Thomas. Some kid spoils them, and then Jesus calls this guy a straight up son of Satan, strikes him dead. Joseph tells Mary to admonish Jesus, but Mary tells him to don't do anything like that. So Jesus smites the back of the boy with his foot, and the boy comes back to life. So it's like, this story actually seems to be making Jesus out to be a little bit worse, but at least he's not disobedient to his parents, I guess, after they ask. And then Jesus straight up just tells the boy, by the way, you're not going to go into the rest of my Father. So yeah, I guess like some funky interpretation of the unforgivable sin here.
He's not gracious.
Yeah. I think the other, if I remember, well, let's see. So yeah, we have a bunch of the other stories from the infancy gospel Thomas. So for example, Jesus is walking, some boy runs against Jesus, and bumps into his shoulder. And this time it notes that it's specifically so that he could hurt him. So Jesus tells the boy he won't return whole from the way that he goes, and the boy falls down and dies. Joseph is disappointed in Jesus again, and he's asking him, like, why are you doing this? And points out that all these parents are coming to him and complaining about what Jesus is doing. And then Jesus says that no son is wise if his father has not taught him with the knowledge of the age, which sounds not necessarily, but I'm just pointing out that does sound a little bit more on the Gnostic side. It could either be just because this person was trying to write something orthodox and they had Gnostic influence unintentionally and were just unaware. It could just not be anything Gnostic at all, but
Could we break down that statement real quick? It says, no son is wise if his father has not taught him with the wisdom of the age?
The knowledge of the age. Yeah.
The knowledge of the age.
Yeah.
So that's saying if the father doesn't tell him some of the cultural do's and don'ts, or just the wisdom, the things that they consider to be a do or a don't, or true or not true, then the son is not wise. And who's saying this? Is it Jesus or Joseph?
Yeah, Jesus is telling Joseph that.
So he's kind of calling Joseph out for not teaching him right.
In this context, it seems like he's saying these kids need to be taught right.
Their parents have been taught.
Yeah. And let me offer an alternative interpretation, because this is the way that I first took this, but I do think that does seem to be a very plausible reading. But quick Greek grammar lesson, or not grammar, but Greek lesson. In the New Testament and our translations, when it says forever or eternity, a lot of the times, the vast majority of the time, all the times from what I've seen, that's the Greek phrase eis ton aion, forgive my pronunciation, but that's into the age. So it could be referring to that specific age that Jesus is talking about, or the age to come. So this could either be like an ordinary, like, yeah, Jesus is giving some pretty good, helpful parenting advice, or it could be Jesus is saying you need to join our Gnostic sect and you need to learn like the special esoteric knowledge that only we hold. So, you know.
Okay, so by Gnostic, you're saying because it has an exclusive kind of group of people who believe things, and he's like, if that kid was good, he would be taught the secret things that are going on in our time.
Yeah, remember that in our last conversation in the infancy gospel of Thomas that has Gnostic, that was written by a Gnostic community, Gnostics not only have this super dualistic of like spiritual good and physical bad view, but they also they're named after the Greek word for knowledge, gnosis, because they believe they had this special type of esoteric hidden knowledge that you couldn't find anywhere else, and you needed that for salvation.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Cool. Good explanation.
Yeah, thanks. So either this is like really good parenting advice that, you know, you might want to tune into, or this is an invitation to a cult, which we're going to tell you don't tune into that.
So if you can't wait until Christmas to go ahead and teach your kid about the ox and the donkey, now is a good time to instead spend time to get them listening to, maybe not a cult. Actually, we probably don't think cults are a good thing for them to be listening to, but maybe general guidelines that are popular around the time that, you know, you could share with them that might actually be good. Because sometimes, like, things that everyone believes, sometimes they're right.
Yeah, get your kid cultured. You know, bring him up to date with all the memes and how to. I mean, give him social skills, for crying out loud. That's good. So
wash your hands for 20 seconds.
You already your
fingernails. You got to get the fingernails.
You're asking a lot. We're topping quite a few adults here at this
depending
point.
On the age, right? We want to set up the immune system well in the early years, but after that,
playing with like Lincoln Logs that aren't really Lincoln Logs outside and stuff. Yeah, so that happens. So everyone's speaking badly of Jesus to Joseph, and Jesus takes the boy that he had told would not return whole. He picks him up by the ear and speaks to him like a father, and the boy resuscitates. So that actually probably would have been a good explanation that would explain what that means. Again, do we know if he's sharing the esoteric knowledge that this kid needs, or if he's just giving this guy parenting advice? It could be either or, but I guess it's a good thing that he resuscitates him. And let me read. No son is wise if his father has not taught him the knowledge of the age. So I guess he has a better shot at the father's rest than the first kid. Yeah. Anyways, so in the infancy of Gospel Thomas, we talk about this whole thing about Zacchaeus, where he tries to teach Jesus. So the same thing, Zacchaeus tells Mary and Joseph that they hold Jesus higher than the tradition of the elders by not, reproving Jesus. So Joseph says that no one can teach Jesus anything because the kid is a punk. So Jesus overhears and he says he doesn't have an earthly father and he will make all of Zacchaeus' descendants cease when he is exalted. And then he goes on to talk about how he spoke with Abraham, and then he calls says like everyone else is less than him. So Jesus is kind of proud in this. And like even in the canonical gospels, like even in the Gospel of John, there's all this like, and the disciples didn't understand what Jesus was saying until after he resurrected, like even the apprentices are not understanding Jesus. So yeah, Jesus kind of yikes in this.
But in this one, he's not just people don't understand him. He has bad rapport with his parents, and he's known as like arrogant.
Yeah.
I guess that's what you're trying to get at.
Well, in this one, he does at least seem to listen to his parent, to Joseph, whenever Joseph is like, what are you doing? He's like, okay, fine. I'll resurrect the boy I just killed for knocking into my shoulder. But he's just still like, but in the first place, what he does in the first place before he resuscitates these or resurrects these people is just straight up nastier, in my opinion. Anyways, Zacchaeus takes Jesus to Levi, perhaps is Matthew, because Matthew goes by that name, to teach him. And Levi smites Jesus on the head with a rod when Jesus refutes to repeat Aleph. So Levi tells him, say Aleph, and Jesus refuses. So Levi smacks him on the head with a rod. So Jesus tells him that he first ought to explain what Aleph even is and why it has 8 triangles in it. And then he will believe it when he talks about Beth. And Levi feels stupid and says that he should be hung on a cross and that fire and torment do nothing to Jesus. So he must have been there. So because of that, Jesus must have been before the flood. There's a whole lot to unpack there. Aleph doesn't it only have like, you can make like 4 triangles out of it, right? Based on the way that it's written.
The Hebrew Aleph?
Yeah. Like, isn't it kind of like an X, but the 2 are like kind of offset?
Yeah. So you can get 1, 2 on either side of the inside. Hold up. If I make an X, you can get 4 on each end, and then you make another, but it only goes part way. It doesn't go above. So I think you can. I don't think you can get 8. Wait a minute. I'd have to relook at it. It's weird. That's difficult.
You really have to learn how the Gnostics write the Aleph to get it right. This is some esoteric, like, apparently this is what Aleph is all about. So, get your handwriting down, because otherwise Jesus is going to have some things to say to you.
There's an interesting, this might be a side tangent, but there's an interesting photo I found online which shows the image of the evolution of the letter Aleph or A. I think it shows it to both, and it shows an image of an ox from like a hieroglyphic, and then it extends into make like a Hebrew Aleph. And I think it also shows an English A as well at one point. So it shows like, but it starts out with the drawing of an ox, and then it turns around and it moves in different directions. Anyway, so
I think I've seen that before.
I might have shown it to you.
Proto-Sinaitic or something, and like the bait is a house as well, or something like that. But like they all start as like images, and
could just be totally fake. Someone could have made it up, or it could be real.
It looks cool though.
Probably not the experts here, but if you want to be interested and share something, and
well, I don't think that the Gnostics, I'm not sure that the person here has their head on straight either about the whole, I don't think he's getting very much, I don't think he's pointing out a whole lot about Aleph here, but like, I guess to be a Gnostic, you really had to sit there and think about the alphabet a little bit before you could join their group. Because apparently there's more there. So
Okay, but let's go back because he says you must have been around since before the flood because you've experienced fire.
he says because fire won't do anything to him. So let's
So
see.
he's
Let me
saying
find. Yeah. So okay. I'm trying to see where it says. Okay. So when Levi hears Jesus say this, he's thunderstruck at an arrangement of the names of the letters. And then he began in the heating of all to cry out and say, ought such a one to live on the earth? Ye, he ought to be hung on the cross, for he can put out fire and make sport of other modes of punishment. And this is like a really long quote. I think that he lived before the flood and was born before the deluge. For what womb bore him, or what mother brought him forth, or what breasts gave him suck? I flee before him. I'm not able to withstand the words from his mouth, but my heart is astounded to hear such words. I do not think that any man can understand what he says except God were with him. Now I, unfortunate wretch, have given myself to be a laughingstock to him. And then he just goes on to, talk about all that.
Okay, so you got the cross. Because Jesus is going to die on a cross.
Mm-hmm.
He's been around since before the flood, so that makes sense in light of the fact that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity who was with God in the beginning. And then the third thing he talks about, who is this person who gave birth to him? So he's gotten, there's a, exaltation of Mary. It's interesting. I think this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I think there's one part where in the Gospels, someone says, hey, blessed is the woman who bore you, or something like that.
The womb that bore you and the breasts that fed you, or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, it's just interesting. So those are the three I got. What else did you get?
Yeah. He does prophesy him being on a cross, and he does go off of like, whoa, this is a pretty smart guy. If he's getting that from, Jesus explains there's 8 triangles in the letter Aleph. He's like, oh dang, now that you mentioned that, you must have been born by a crazy woman. Now that you mentioned that, you must have been here before like, all right, Levi.
Even if there's 6, there's 2 you haven't seen yet.
Yeah, like this. I mean, he seems like a pretty fit teacher if he can, he seems to be able to figure out his students pretty quickly, even if he can't figure out that much about Aleph, so yeah. But yeah, you're right. It does point out, Jesus' pre-existence, him being hung on a cross. Why it's inserted into this narrative, I guess I got to be around more Gnostics if I want to figure out what this whole Aleph bet teaching thing means. Anyways, so then Jesus tells the children of Israel that the fruitful shall bear fruit, the blind shall see, the lame walk, the poor enjoy good things, and the dead revive. And then everyone is restored and everyone is healed. So here we actually do see, for all the bad, at least he, I guess if you could say so, makes up for it in, healing all these people. In the infancy gospel Thomas, he just heals people that he had hurt a little bit later. But here he heals everyone in his vicinity. So regardless. Cool. So the next section, the next part of this, it's not really half. We're mostly through this, is called the Pars Altera. So I'm guessing it's from another source. But anyways, more animals. So there's a story where Jesus goes to a cave with a lioness and a cub, and then the lioness comes by him and worships him, or all the lions actually. And then the people, they don't see that, so they're just saying like, this person is going over to that cave with those beasts to be eaten by it because he deserves it for his sins, because he's a sinner. And then Jesus comes out and tells the people, how much better are the beasts than you, seeing they recognize their Lord and glorify him, while you men who have been made in the image and likeness of God do not know him. Beasts know me and are tame. Men see me and do not acknowledge me. And then he crosses through the Jordan and tells the lions not to hurt anyone, and the waters of the Jordan open up on the right and on the left, like in Joshua. So another animal narrative with Jesus taming these lions. I could actually see this being a canonical event. I don't think it is by any means. I don't think there's any way that this was like passed on by oral tradition and then written down in this. But this does kind of sound like I could see Jesus saying this to people who are like calling him out. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of cool. And then chapters 37 through 39, getting back into it, still based on the infancy gospel of Thomas. So anyways, Joseph ends up, he goes to Mary and tells her that Jesus makes him sorrowful even unto death, and thinks that someone might smite him to death because of his evil. So Mary tells Joseph not to believe that, and says that the one who sent him will protect him from all evil. It seems like Joseph might be like semi-predicting Jesus's crucifixion, and Mary here is the like confused one. Like the Psalm 91 means, therefore, he won't strike his foot against a rock, therefore, God's got him, nothing will happen to him. Which is true of him, but he's gonna suffer and die before he's glorified in his resurrection. So that's what I get from this. I don't really know if there's anything else, but it's just an interesting little, mother-father dialogue there. So Joseph and Mary put Jesus in school for the third time. He comes in, takes the book out of the teacher's hand, and then he starts teaching, even though what he's teaching is not written in the book. So the teacher says, Jesus, shoot, you're the real teacher. Who can understand your words? And then this supposedly fulfills, and then this makes this quotation, but my text cites that we don't know what this is from. But this fulfills some saying that happened. The river of God is full of water. You have prepared their food, for thus is the preparation thereof. So
Jesus fulfilled something.
He fulfilled something. I don't know. That's interesting. I guess there's other things out there, other apocryphal texts that we don't know about, that don't exist to this day. And then Jesus ends up going to Capernaum, and he sees some person named Joseph who's dead. So Jesus asks Joseph if he will heal him because he has the same name. I guess there's this whole lesson of, look out for your homies that share your name. In the beginning of this gospel, Mary is worshipped along with Jesus. And we've seen things about, Mary being made a little bit higher. That's in another infancy gospel. We'll see that Mary heals people, but Joseph says, I can't do it. So Jesus tells him he just needs to put the handkerchief that's on his head on him and say, Christ save you, and he will be revived. So Joseph does that, and he says, Jesus save you, and he rises the person from the dead. So, and this is kind of similar to how in the Acts of the Apostles, the shadow of the apostles is going over people and healing them. They're taking handkerchiefs that had touched them and then touching other people. And then, as we had talked about in the Lost Gospels episode, Christians took a higher view of relics. This is where the idea of relics came from, of like, oh, this is like the bones of a martyr, or this had touched and been with some father, and so it has some healing power. So you do see a reflection of that. But yeah, that is the apocryphal gospel of Pseudo Matthew in all of its glory.
Wow. What's interesting? Let's see. It's got that aspect of the animal relationship. You've got Jesus, and he's tamer-ish in some senses than before. We did see Zacchaeus. We did see Levi. I don't think we saw Levi. Did we see Levi in Gospel of Thomas, or Infancy Gospel of Thomas? Nope. So we got Levi. Very interesting. Interesting that Levi didn't actually write, if this is the same Matthew, didn't write that down. But also, maybe that's one of the reasons why they call this one the Pseudo Gospel of Matthew, right? It's because they're like, oh, well, this is Matthew, and he's writing this down, and he's like, he was the teacher.
Yeah, well,
is that a theory?
Let me see. Yeah, it is. I don't know. Well, it does call him Matthew in the beginning when it says that he wrote this, and not Levi. Okay. So maybe it's not. It's just with question marks around it. I don't know what it just maybe says Levi. So it's Matthew. Like, how are we supposed to? Yeah, I don't know, one way, or maybe it is Matthew, and then after class he says, Jesus talked to me after class, and then Jesus shares all the other things. He's like, oh, just stay here for a little bit, let me write that down, and then that's where we get the Pseudo Gospel of Matthew. Yeah, you also see a higher, as you've been noting throughout, you also see like a higher view of Mary. Her mother gave birth to her in virginity. Mary herself stays a virgin, vows to stay a virgin. You also see more of an emphasis on Jews and Gentiles, which I think is interesting that they include that in, and it doesn't really seem to have any of this anti-Semitism, even though this is written later on. I just think that's interesting because, we live very far out from the Jew and Gentiles whole like debate that was like one of the primary things that Paul is dealing with, and that's just like today you talk about Jews and Gentiles are together. Okay, cool. Like we live in a melting pot, but here I don't know. I thought that was interesting and kind of cool how, it deals with that, and it has, classic ox and ass. That's, so yeah.
When was this written again?
Before the end of the 5th century.
So this wouldn't be, we wouldn't consider this medieval, I don't think, then. We'd consider it ancient-ish.
Yeah. Maybe just short of medieval, right? Doesn't
Getting
that just
closer.
begin around the 5th century?
Yeah, I think they say like 5th century till like 10th, 15th, depending on who's saying what.
Okay. Yeah. This is a lengthier one, and we're just going over the differences. So, and the more spicy stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I would say there's a higher view of Mary, and it just adds in some unnecessary things, as well as Jesus seems like cooler in some parts, and a little bit more of this like esoteric knowledge thing. But I do like a couple of the additions. I do like the ox and the ass. I like that. I like more of the additions to the proto-evangelium of James. And I like the animals. I think those are dope. Those need to stay. So I think we could add those additions to the proto-evangelium of James, and that would just be dope, but just not take the rest of this. So for that, I think I'm going to give this one a 6 for my orthodoxy index. It does add in some good stuff that's like, oh, that's pretty dope. Dragons, but then it's
I'm for the dragons. I think it spices things up. So I'll be a little bit more skeptic, and so I had a low opinion of the infancy gospel of Thomas, and it didn't fix all of those problems. Jesus is not gracious. Jesus kills a kid. His attitude towards children is pretty low. And so that seems to be pretty problematic. Additionally, I do think it presents some level of a problem when we think about the Gospel of James, or not the Gospel of James, the Epistle of James, because the Epistle of James is written by James. And so if James is really, old, that makes him old whenever he's writing it, which maybe he still wrote it. I don't know. Maybe I'm swallowing a camel and straining out a gnat here. Maybe I'll say I'll give it a 5. I'll be a little bit less gracious on this side. So
yeah, it's hard because it does have like dope additions. Like, dude, I would have loved to see like an orthodox version of proto-evangelium of James with these, but then you have, and I think a lot of scholars even say that James is one of the first New Testament texts, but still that would be like
they were locked on. Guy. They knew. they knew.
It's because of this text that they believe that James is like, oh man, I'm getting to it, So, yeah.
James was 90 years old writing it in 40 AD.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah. Well, this has been it. This is the pseudo gospel, or the gospel. I always get these mixed up. This is the gospel of Pseudo Matthew. We're going to be continuing in going through the infancy gospels. So make sure that you tune in to the next one. But until then, it's Bible on.
Bible on.